Welcome, everyone. Today we are talking about young adults we're really diving into the topic of young adults who are battling mental health and healing from abuse. And I think what's so interesting about this topic in particular is that it may trigger some strong feelings because I think as parents or as adults working maybe you're just an adult working with young people, or maybe you have a child who is struggling with mental health or healing from something traumatic, or maybe you yourself have gone through that. And so this may trigger some feelings in you today. And so we understand that this is a difficult topic to lean into, and yet we have to, because that is how we move through it to healing, is by leaning into it. We know that God has plans for us in this conversation, for all of us, for you listening and for us who are having it. Today we have on Ben Locke, who is a former collegiate soccer player. And although he doesn't quite understand how and when it happened, he is now a writer of words. After multiple injuries and chronic illness, he had to abandon his hopes of playing professional soccer, and he dove headfirst into writing as a means of escape, expression, and faith. And as it turns out, the journals that he kept and the interactions with the Lord in a notebook eventually became a book, and the book is called "In Our Suffering, Lord Be Near." And he really chronicles his own mental health journey and his own journey of abuse in the book. And we're going to dive into that today. So welcome, Ben. We are so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Krista and Alex. I'm happy to be here.
So Ben, you left home at 16 to pursue competitive soccer. So what was the state of your 16-year-old self at that time?
Oh, man. Well, if you would have asked me at 16, I would have said, I got it all together. I got it all figured out. I know what I'm doing and why. Obviously, I feel much different about that now, but it was really, soccer was the center of my whole life. And so the decision to pursue that, it was a decision that I made with my family, but it centered around, okay, this is sort of the trajectory for me to play in college and then to play pro. And so this is the best opportunity for me. So that was really all that I was thinking about. I wasn't thinking about, the family dynamics, my mental health, my physical health, where I was with my faith. I thought I had a lot of those things figured out. And to be totally honest, they were byproducts of the game that I played and loved. So that's a quite candid version of that. But I'm sure if you would ask me 10 years ago, I would have answered it much differently.
Well, and there's just, as someone who played really competitive soccer myself, I understand with any activity. So whether it's a sport or a different interest, our identity gets wrapped up in it to the point where we don't really know who we are apart from it. So can you speak a little bit to that and to how your identity was really formed around your sport?
Yeah, it's especially challenging because you're so young. I started kicking a soccer ball when I was 4 years old. I started walking, and as soon as I started walking, I had a soccer ball at my feet. And so I think, especially when you start to work your way up and you're like, oh, okay, I can actually compete, and this could be a future for me. This could be, this could carry me through the first few years of my entire life. That starts to shift and change, and it's all of a sudden people are telling you things, and they're ascribing things to you. They're telling you how great you are, and oh, you're going to be this and you're going to be that. So I don't think consciously as a 14-year-old, I was like, oh, this is my identity. This is what matters to me. This is everything to me. I think subconsciously that was happening because every decision I made revolved around the game of soccer, and everything, so many of the things that people were telling me revolved around who I was as a soccer player. So naturally that became my identity. But again, I don't think I really noticed it or realized it at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, as parents, I watch this happening with my kids. And do you think there was something different that adults in your life could have done or said or framed soccer in a different way for you? Or was that just your choice and you were going head first no matter what?
Yeah, I think that part of it is just me and sort of the way I'm wired, and also just kind of the level that things were happening at and the pace at which they happened. Things kind of just happened, and I don't know if I necessarily again was very aware of it. I had and have had a great relationship with my parents. I grew up in a Christian household, and they've had a strong marriage for my entire youth. So I've honestly always looked up to them. But I was also I've always been a very driven and motivated person, and so I think there was definitely, my parents were like, "Are you sure you're ready to move out of the house? Are you sure you feel okay about that?" And I was like, "Yes, 100%. Don't worry about me. I'm good to go." So there's a certain level that it's like, maybe this could have been said or this could have been done, but I also think that a 16-year-old is a 16-year-old, and
Mm-hmm.
especially with parents, I think there's this notion that you might be able to get through or break through, but the reality is sometimes I think as a kid you have to learn certain things that you might not want to listen to mom and dad, or you might not, the things that they're sharing with you might be totally true, but they might not resonate because you're just like, I'm 16, I want to go kick a ball around the field. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're not ready to hear
Right.
it. I mean, timing is everything.
Mhm.
And that's why we can tell our kids something over and over and over again, but until they come to the place where they're ready to see that as wisdom, they're just not ready.
Right.
So your dream came true. You got recruited by a Division I program, you were playing, and then you quickly got injured and you began to spend a lot of time in the training room
Mhm.
and trying to rehabilitate. Can you talk to us about kind of what happened in that season?
Yeah, so I actually ended up graduating a semester early from high school. My coach, they offered me a scholarship. They're like, "Hey, we want to get you in as early as we can so that you can kind of get integrated into the college game and be ready to play as a freshman." And so, of course, I said yes. Whatever the coach or the trainer tells you to do, you're going to do. So I left high school halfway through and started college in January instead of typically like a fall semester. So about a month into my first time with the team, I started experiencing numbness in my legs. Super strange, super random. Got diagnosed with
Mm-hmm.
something called compartment syndrome, which the doctor was like, "Hey, you might not ever play soccer again, and even if you do, you're probably not going to be the same player that you were before." And so I was 17 years old when I heard that. I was just beginning. I thought everything was just getting started for me. And so that, about a month later, I got a surgery, and it was really that sidelining effect. Like you said, I spent a lot of time in the training room. My trainer started to sexually abuse me as a byproduct of me being sidelined. And so, as I mentioned, I made a joke, but it's true. Your trainers and your coaches hold so much authority. When you're a student athlete, what they say goes, and what they tell you to do, you do. So that was really the catalyst. I ended up getting 3 surgeries in 3 years after that, and that was sort of the beginning of my body just kind of falling apart.
I think a lot of people think, or maybe a lot of adults, parents think, well, how does that just happen? Like, how does someone just start abusing someone? Can you talk a little bit about the psychology of
Mhm.
that and what happens and how it just doesn't happen overnight, but it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a process. And so will you speak to that and maybe some of the signs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that relationship and dynamics in relationship are so important. Especially, I was 17 at the time, so I was what you would call a young adult. I was somewhat mature. I mean, certainly not a fully formed adult, but I was old enough. I was a Division I college athlete. I'm a guy. I should be strong enough to know these things. That's been sort of the trouble of trying to unpack this. But when you enter a dynamic that has some level of power and authority and ownership of, there's a relationship dynamic where one person is essentially above another person. And that's exactly what this was. And if you add in something like the love of my life, the passion of literally the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, which is playing this game that I love, and then you sort of pair that with this person holds the keys to me getting on the field or not, that just
Mm-hmm.
creates a power dynamic that's really, really, really tricky. And again, if a person chooses to exploit that, it's really hard to know. And so I think for me, it was, I will do whatever it takes to get back on the field because I love this game, and it's like we talked about, it's my identity. And so a lot of those, potential red flags were easy for me to miss. I think for parents in the dynamic of how that plays out, it's asking questions. And I think it's also when you're raising kids, what are boundaries? What do boundaries look like? How do different people in your life, how should they talk to you? How should they touch you or not touch you? Those are really tricky and kind of sensitive things. But in my mind, never really got spoken about. So when those things started to happen, I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep moving forward and not ask questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking about that conversation of appropriate talking and touching, I wonder if parents of girls talk about it more and that boys don't get that kind of guidance as much. Do you think that's true?
I think that's a fantastic point. And I think it's a point that we need to just be honest and probably more open about. Is even as a guy, especially as a young guy, super uncomfortable. It's like, don't talk to me, you know? And I think the dynamics in guys are much different, and especially another man too. When it's another man that enters the picture, that adds a whole nother dynamic. And you have this dynamic with your peers, especially in a sporting culture, or if you're a part of a group or a team of some sort, where you're doing and you're acting and you're talking in a certain way with your peers. But when you enter in somebody that's many, many years older, decades older than you, those things are much different. But I think men are so uncomfortable talking about those things that usually we just avoid it at all costs.
So it's true. I'm sure people are feeling uncomfortable as even we're talking about it, because it's like your worst nightmare, honestly, as a parent, is to imagine that your child would start to fall into a relationship like this, and that an adult in their life would abuse their power to that degree. Talk to us about just what happened with your mental health the further you progressed into that relationship.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that happened was I was internalizing things with probably not really even realizing that I was internalizing them, and I was looking for ways to essentially vent them and take them out, because they were coming in, so I needed to express them in some other way. So for I think the abuse specifically and physical things like that, and the mental sort of ramifications, again, I think for men especially, but for all people, it's intimacy is suddenly becomes very confusing and complicated, and vulnerability becomes very confusing and complicated. And usually those two things work as opposites. All of a sudden, I don't want to be vulnerable about anything. I don't want to talk about anything. I don't want to admit to anything. And intimacy is suddenly something I'm desperate and craving for, but I don't know how it's supposed to look. So that was the challenge for me. And so mentally, confusion and sort of this desire for intimacy, but also this terrifying notion of being vulnerable created a lot of anxiety, because I was basically internalizing a lot and trying to externalize those things in unhealthy ways. I was trying to take them into relationships or vices, or I would just shove them down as far as they'd go, and hope that they wouldn't come up at any point. So that naturally is really a powerful, unfortunate formula for anxiety and becoming super angsty about everything. And then, of course, the self-image and the way that I started to feel about myself, that's sort of the road I think that leads to things like depression.
I'm thinking about you saying vices. The self-medicating that happens, I would imagine, as you're trying not to deal with the feelings, can probably take effect in lots of different forms. So that too could be something for a parent to look at, is if there is a sudden change in behavior that maybe we would initially get mad about. Like, you're breaking a rule, you're doing something I don't want you to. But for us to pause might be something we could do as parents and say, what are the feelings behind this behavior, rather than just focusing on behavior that we don't like.
It's a fantastic point. And I think I'm glad you brought it up, because I couldn't agree more. Young people, and this was me, I don't know what to do with my feelings and my emotions, because I'm young, I'm immature. And so I'm taking these things and then sort of deflecting them in my behaviors and in the things that I start doing. But so rarely, I would maybe even go so far as to say never, it is the case that I just start acting out or turning to vices, drinking, drugs, girl relationship, whatever it is, for no reason whatsoever. I'm trying to think of any circumstance where that would take place. There's something that precedes that. And it might be something extreme and really intense, like abuse. It might be something that doesn't feel that intense and that dark. But I agree completely. And I think it's hard for parents. You want to fix and you want to address and you want to discipline. And I think that makes total sense. But if the preceding thing doesn't kind of come out into the light, then there's not going to be much that gets through.
Mm-hmm.
So during this time, I mean, were there any adults or friends that were noticing
their relationship at the time? So there was that dynamic, but that was something that that person had no idea that this was going on. So even that she was probably the closest person I had at the time in my life outside of my family, and she had no idea. So that's one evidence. My parents and I kind of go back and forth on this a little bit. There were a couple moments where I made a comment or made a joke, something that sounded sort of like a joke about what was happening to me. And there was like a side eye that I got and a little bit of dialogue, but then I deflected it. And so, no, I mean, not to the sense of somebody coming in and asking like, hey, is there something going on here? Or I've noticed this thing is happening. What's the deal? There was not really any of that.
Would there have been a question that someone could have asked? Or do you feel like you just weren't, again, we're back to that readiness. You weren't ready.
That's such a good question. To be honest, I don't know is probably the truthful answer. But at the same time, I do think that there's a level to all of this where I say there's probably not. No, I don't think there was probably something somebody could have said or asked. Maybe somebody that I trusted if they witnessed something, but so much of it was kind of hidden that it would have been hard for me to connect this thing happening and you asking this question and me kind of putting the dots together. So, and I also think there's a challenge there too. I don't want to, kind of take on a bitterness or some sort of resentment that another person didn't do something or should have done something. But I also think that there are things that people could have done more of that they didn't do. So there's a little bit of both there.
So how did you finally escape from that relationship?
So in some ways, I'm fortunate. There was a coaching change at at the university that I was going to. And I touched the field for 2.5 years because I was injured the whole time. And my trainer was intentionally keeping me on the sidelines. And so I ended up in a position where I really had to transfer. I had to leave. I had to kind of start fresh if I wanted to continue playing. So I look back on that now and say, okay, God had a way out for me and an opportunity for me to find, a different university to go to. So I ended up transferring. And so in a very literal sense, I was kind of able to escape it.
I'm curious, once you were out, once you were away, what was the process of facing, this is what I just experienced?
Yeah, it was a long process. It was there wasn't like a light bulb moment. Things started to unpack, I guess, as soon as I landed at a different university, because all of a sudden I had dynamics with coaches and trainers that were much different. And I was like, oh, this is my trainer here is not doing what my trainer there was doing. So immediately that started to sort of play out in my own mind. But it was probably a year, even 2 years before I even spoke about it to somebody that wasn't me, that I actually communicated to somebody else, hey, I think this might have happened to me. And even from that point on forward, it was probably another year, maybe 2 years before I actually sat some people down and was like, hey, this happened to me, and mom and dad or brother and sister or whoever it was, I wanted to just let you know. And that's really when the process began. That's when I went to therapy. But all told, that was probably 3 or 4 years after I got to a new university and kind of got set up. So that just sort of shows you the way that these things can just get really complicated.
So there's a lot of anger that comes with abuse, and you just feel like, right, I mean, rightly so, that, there's the injustice of it is so infuriating. And you just feel that, why did this happen? And why was that person put in a position of power? And how could they abuse it? There's just so much that you can grab onto. and be angry about. So how have you processed that?
To be totally honest, I was angry. I was angry for a long time. And I would be lying if I said otherwise. I think it's important to just tell the truth about that. And I think that I didn't know why. I was angry about things that made no sense. I was like, why is this thing making me angry? It wasn't actually recently. I heard somebody say helplessness produces rage. And that I've never connected with a statement more. The feeling of helplessness in a person creates so much anger that you almost can't put to words that how that happens. And so to answer your question, I got angry, and it was this process of trying to figure out why, and then you add in a God that I'm told is good, and all things are good, and he's perfect and he's holy, and so that even in a spiritual level created a lot of anger too, because I was like, well, how then, if this happened to me, how is he good? And so it was a lot of me failing and trying to deal with my anger in the wrong ways, and sort of slowly but surely those things coming to fruition in a little bit more of a healthier way. But I had to experience the anger first. I had to ask the questions first. I had to start doubting the things first in order for God to start working on my heart.
Yeah, that is a powerful statement, that helplessness produces rage.
And it's true. I mean, when a situation happens that you are completely unable to change, the feeling that gives you feel like you have to be defensive. You feel like, there's so much there that, it's a minefield a little bit.
Yeah. And to think that somehow we're created that way too, that there is a survival element in there. And I go back to that same idea of, okay, as a parent, if I see one of my older kids, young adults, experiencing a lot of anger, instead of just getting defensive, if I'm on the receiving end of that anger, to have that pause and say, what's behind that? Is there something, which again, may be something quite dramatic and painful, but also may not. It just may be a feeling of helplessness in another area that we can work through. But it's a concept that can be used in various situations, I think, for parents.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, and I think about just that anger is sad's bodyguard.
That's right.
I love that. And that is true. And so when did you get to the sadness?
That's a fantastic question. You're exactly right. That especially, I don't like to always draw comparisons between men and women, and I'm not trying to do that here, but I think especially men are so guarded, and they're so like, the truth is I was sensitive and vulnerable and wanted to be vulnerable, and I was hurt. And so, but I didn't want to go to people and say, I'm hurt. You know what I mean? I didn't want that to be the language. The language was, I'm angry and I'm frustrated and whatever else. So, I think, to be honest, when I reached a point of sadness, it was when I started to unpack things a little bit and to get the response from people that I cared about and people that were there to help me. That started to relieve some of the anger, and the anger started to turn to sadness. And sadness is healthy. Anger can be healthy, I think. I mean, there's a certain, righteous anger, and we can be angry and not sin. So there's that. But like you said, I think sadness is underneath it. And sadness is when you start to heal, because it's like, okay, why am I sad? Why is the byproduct of sadness anger in my life? And so it was when trusted people started to come alongside me and support me in that. And it was when I had the chance to be honest about why I was feeling the way I was feeling. I was like, this is why I'm angry. Don't you guys understand? So there was a little bit of that where I just had to express it, that freed up a lot.
Was it kind of naming the losses, the griefs?
Yeah, for sure. It was putting a finger on it. That changed a lot. That helped a lot. It was saying, okay, this thing happened, and here's how it led to this decision making, and this mistake that I made, and these things that I was trying to find, but was doing it in the wrong way. So not only was it freeing to say, okay, this happened, and sort of a level of acceptance about, okay, this did happen, and that's okay. That doesn't mean it's good, but it means that I've accepted that it happened. Then all of a sudden I started to realize how that what happened to me led to this relationship or these mistakes that I made. And that felt so much better to be like, oh, that might have been why I made that decision or why I said that thing. And that was very freeing as well.
So there is this element of suffering that was introduced into your life. And we hate that. I mean, I don't like it. We don't want it for our kids. I mean, this is it's like no one wants to suffer. And yet suffering is a part of the human experience. You've experienced it in a way that is tragic and terrible. Can you speak to, you have a quote or a phrase called suffering rightly. How did you come to that? And what did that, how did that embody in your life?
Oh, so many things. It took, again, a lot of failures. It took a lot of, trying to displace what I was actually feeling and making mistakes in that way. But to be totally honest with you, it took a God. It took Jesus. It took me going to scripture and saying, oh my goodness, wait, you're telling me that the God who created me and created everything, when he came to this earth, what did he do? He suffered. He came and he suffered, and he was a man of sorrows, and he was weeping over his friend, and he was sweating drops of blood because of the angst and the agony that he was feeling in the garden. And so not only that, but then I went to Job and I went to the Psalms, and I was like, okay, wait, these are men and women of God saying things like, I wish I was never born. Job says that in chapters 5, 6, and 7. And so that broke down so much for me, because I thought the notion of suffering rightly, especially in a biblical context, was, okay, yeah, my life's falling apart, but I'm okay. God is so good, and God, I love you so much. And instead, there were moments where I had to go to God and be like, God, I don't understand how this could be good. How are you good? How is this situation good? How are you going to use that? And so the irony is, the thing that I was most afraid to say, the questions I was most afraid to ask, the things I were most ashamed of sort of bringing to the surface were actually sort of the keys to freedom and experiencing a level of intimacy with God that I never had before. And so that's the level of his goodness. That's the level of his grace, is that my questions and my doubt and my insecurities and my anger, even sometimes anger that I thought was directed at him, he took and suddenly softened me and used them in ways that I never, ever expected him to.
The other day I was, I'm listening to this book right now called, I think it's called On Fire, but it's about this guy who literally, when he was 9, he caught fire and was burned on pretty much his entire body. Anyway, now he's a motivational speaker and he's incredible. It's incredible he even lived. But someone showed him during a counselor showed him this story during one of their sessions about this little girl who comes into a classroom and she drops her red coat and goes and sits down. And the teacher keeps saying, can you please go pick up your red coat? And she keeps saying, that's not my coat. And then the other kids in the class start saying, no, we saw you come in with that coat and you dropped the coat. And she's saying, it's not my coat. The whole point being that until we decide to pick up our red coat and to actually own the red coat, then we can't really move through to the healing that we all have. And so that's what I just heard you say, is basically that you finally picked up your red coat and you said, this is it. And then because of that, with God, alongside and partnering with God in that, then you're able to actually move through to that healing place.
That suffer with and for the Lord will also experience the glory that he experienced. And something struck me about that recently, where I was like, wait a second, that actually means we need to look to Jesus and how he suffered and what he did. And part of my sharing in the sufferings of Christ is embodying what Christ did when he suffered. And I've had to realize, wait, I have these emotions because God created me in his image. Otherwise, I wouldn't have anger. I wouldn't have these battling emotions, agony, even anxiety and fear. Like, these things are real and they're part of my humanity. And some of them are byproducts of sin, but a lot of them are also just the way that God made me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the emotions that I have. And otherwise, Christ would not have exemplified a lot of those emotions in the way that he did. And so not only is it sort of it's picking up the coat, yes, and it's also letting those things come the way that they need to come. Otherwise, you're never going to get there. If the sadness doesn't settle in a little bit, then you're never going to grieve. If the loss doesn't settle in fully, then you might never sort of experience the freedom that's on the other side. So it's really important to go experience them. It's important to not stay and to just sit in that for 10 years, but you got to go there. Otherwise, it'll just pile up and kind of stay hidden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's hard to coach people to do, right? Go sit in your suffering, in your pain, in your grief. And I'm picturing someone listening who maybe does have a wound that is still open from years ago, maybe not for their child, but for themselves. And our encouragement is that God can meet you in that pain and that grief. And you may need to find some help as you sit in it, whether it's from a friend or a professional, but that God is not afraid or surprised by your feelings. And to be in them and to recognize them is the version of putting on the coat and saying, this happened and it took a lot from me, and I have suffered as a result. And God, I need you now in this place, and I need you moving forward. And we believe that God can do a healing work. Sometimes that takes a long time, and sometimes the end result is not what we expect. But I think that gets to the suffering of Christ too, right? That things don't always get tied up pretty and neat, but that doesn't mean God isn't there and working with us and in us and through us.
That's exactly right. Yep. Well said. Agreed.
Ben, what do you say to maybe parents who want their kids to snap out of it, and really grieving or mental health is a journey. And so maybe one day you're doing okay and the next day you dive, and then, a couple days later so what do you say to those parents that are tired of their kid being sad or depressed?
Man, it's a tough question. I think a lot of times what happens in the parent-child dynamic and relationship is parents want to understand. They want to understand why and what's going on, and kids oftentimes are like, you don't. You're not going to. You're never going to understand what I'm feeling, and you can't. And so I think I've experienced that with my parents as well. It's like, I don't know how to tell you that I'm not doing well. If you keep asking me, how am I doing? And I'm battling this thing, I'm not good. I'm not doing good. And I wasn't good yesterday. And I don't know what else you want me to say. And so I think, I also think it's kind of an impossible task. The honest answer to me is your child belongs to the Lord, period. And what God chooses to do is what God chooses to do. And your intervention in your child's life does not supersede God's providence and God's sovereignty over your child's life. And that is, I'm not a parent, and so I don't want to speak, ignorantly about that. I know that there's so much, and parents can do so much, but I think that maybe a lot of parents would experience freedom if they're like, okay, Lord, my child belongs to you. I'm going to pray for them constantly. I'm going to go to war for them in the hidden places and in prayer. But right now, especially in those seasons where your kids are like, I'm not fine, I'm not doing well, I'm just going to try to keep showing up. I'm not going to try and understand necessarily the why or the what. I'm just going to show up, let them know that I'm here, let them know that I care for them and that I love them. And that might be all you can do for a stretch of time. That might be the only thing you can do. That's certainly what I experienced, is the presence of mom and dad, or mom or dad, whatever it is, was just about all I needed. And sometimes when we tried to go further than that, it put the walls back up.
Yeah, you might not be a parent, but you certainly spoke to parents right there. Because I think that is the challenge, because you're right. Not only do we want to know the why, we want to fix
That's
it.
right.
We want them to feel better.
That's right.
And so we think that by continually asking for their affirmation that they are better to make us feel better, we become naggy, and it's not helpful. That's an I statement right there. So you're right that presence, and again, that is in some ways how God meets us as well, is that he meets us with his presence always. And he can do healing that we can't do as people, but he also heals us in his presence.
That's right.
Through his presence.
Yeah, it's a really interesting notion. It's a lifelong thing that we're going to constantly fail at. But the truth is that's the way it works for every single thing we have in our lives. The relationship between every single earthly thing people, things, work, career, whatever it is. God, that there is this place as believers that we're supposed to arrive in, that is, God, I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to give myself completely to being a wife, or being a husband, or being a daughter or son, or whatever, or being an employee, or being a team member. Yet it's not mine. This isn't mine to keep. It's not mine to hold on to. It's not mine to control. It's not mine to decide what happens with it. It's yours. And so there's this really difficult tension that I think, again, we'll never kind of find it on this side of eternity, of saying, I'm going to give myself completely to it, and I'm going to honor you with the best way that I can. But ultimately, the control and the power is completely yours. And that's hard for us. It's so hard. It's so hard.
So hard. Well, Ben, as we close out today, is there any wisdom you want to offer to someone who maybe is navigating a similar situation, either with mental health or abuse with their child or their loved one, or maybe themselves? What word of encouragement would you give?
Yeah, first and foremost, just for people to know they're not alone. I can't say it enough times, and I know other people say it as well, but you're not alone in what you're going through. I also think it's important for believers to hear you're not less of a believer, you're not less qualified, you're not less than, because you're battling anxiety or depression, or because something happened to you. And by the way, what happened to you is not a byproduct of something you did or something you said. It's a byproduct of the sin and sort of the brokenness of the world that we're living in. It is not a result of some mistake that you made or something that you did wrong. So I think that's really important. And lastly, really, and this is what the book is about, and this is my story now, it is all of the hidden things. The moment you start exposing them, even just a little bit to the light, is when you're going to start to experience freedom. So I would just, no matter how painful or uncomfortable or how unnatural it might feel, to start taking those things out of the hidden places and bringing them into the light, you'll start to experience healing. God will, that's when God can work. And by the way, He knows those things are there anyways. He knows they're there. So you're not hiding them. You're only hiding them from people, and you're kind of hiding it from yourself. So bring them out into the light. God can restore that.
I love that. Yeah. And I think anyone experiencing suffering can benefit from your book. And I just love the title that, just Lord, be near in our suffering. God, be here, be right here. And so, thank you for for just your voice in the world, both through this podcast, but also through your writing. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's been so good.